Welcome back to the Ladakh Literature Festival of 2020. The following session for today is Mindful Journeys, Extraordinary Experiences, Outer and Inner, a one-on-one discussion between David Michie and Shantum Seth. Shantum Seth leads Buddha path journeys in the footsteps of the Buddha to places of significance in Buddha's life and culture in India and other parts of Asia. David Michie leads mindful safaris to the African bush and Victoria Falls. Both integrate formal meditation sessions and the teachings as part of these unique pilgrimages. In this session, they describe the journeys they lead, outer and inner, and the impact on those who travel with them. They will end their session by offering short meditations. Thank you for that stimulating session. Do tune in for more such exciting sessions.
So welcome, dear friends, to this session between David and myself for the Ladakh Literary Festival. We'll be sharing a little bit over the next 40 minutes, but we thought we'd start with a meditation and close with the meditation. So I'm going to just share a short meditation where it's really a practice of arrival in the very here and now, in the present moment. It is a practice that was suggested by the Buddha in a text called the Anapanasati Sutra. And so I'll just guide it for the next few minutes. So those of us who are sitting, watching this, you can try and sit in a comfortable way. Try and keep your back straight. Feel the solidity of the ground under you or the chair under you. Feel your spine, curvature of the spine going up the back, into the neck, to the head. Just sitting upright and stable. You can imagine a thread holding the top of your head to the sky. Just feeling your body between earth and sky. And relaxing your body, relaxing your shoulders, your arms, your hands, which you can place on your lap, on your knees, on your thighs. Relaxing the muscles of your back, your hips, your thighs, your legs, your feet, your chest, your abdomen. Feeling the softness in your abdomen. And feeling the gentle rise and fall of the abdomen with each in-breath and each out-breath. Being aware of the whole length of the breath, the beginning of the in-breath, the end of the in-breath, from the beginning of the out-breath to the end of the out-breath. And just being aware of this breath of life, that we are alive, and offering ourselves a gentle half smile of awareness. It relaxes the muscles of your face, gives us a sense of well-being. And just knowing that our body and mind are anchored here in the present moment, in the here and now. And I'll invite one more sound of the bell just to close this short guided practice. But listen attentively to the sound. Be aware what a miracle it is to just hear, to have ears to hear. Those of us who have our eyes closed, when you open them, be aware of the miracle of seeing. Colors, the forms. So thank you, dear friends. This is a practice I do all the time when I find that I want to just really focus in on being here and now, wherever I am, on whatever I'm doing, not being distracted. And it's a practice that also helps me relax and feel more alive. So my name is Shantum, and I'm very grateful that the organizers asked David and me to share in a conversation. And I've got to know David a little bit over a couple of Zoom calls before this, and wanted to ask him really for your benefit, in a sense, and for mine too, to understand, first of all, where does David go? What has inspired him to do these journeys? In Africa, if I understand. So, David, please.
Thank you, Shantam, and thank you everyone at the Ladakh Literature Festival for inviting me along. It's a great honor to be with you, and especially an honor to be in this conversation with Shantam. Yes, in terms of my own background, I was actually born and brought up in Africa. My parents were Scots, and they had three sons, of which I was the second. So I was born and brought up in the middle of Africa. And with all that entails, there was a closeness to the countryside. It was a fairly untamed and wilderness. There are many amazing wild animals, but because I was brought up there, I took them completely for granted. I didn't think there's anything particularly special about herds of elephant or journeys of giraffe or all the wonderful beings that we were surrounded by. You know, there is such diversity in Africa of wildlife. And of course, then the landscapes, the amazing things we have in Zimbabwe, including one of the great natural wonders of the world, Victoria Falls. All of that I was amazingly kind of complacent about because it was in my country and I just grew up with that as the norm. When I went to university and made my career, I was actually living in London, and I lived in London for 10 years. And that's really brought home to me in a very visceral way, that I felt a huge sense of wrench, of dislocation from where I'd been brought up. And that was something that I felt very profoundly, living a very, very urban life compared to what I was used to growing up. So much later in life, because I now live in Australia, I met and married an Australian woman. Later in life, as I have become more familiar and practiced meditation and the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, I have had a kind of renaissance, if you like, of a sense of connection to nature, and in particular, the nature that I grew up with. So I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to share my own passion, my own sense of homecoming with Africa with other people? because Africa is the cradle of civilization, so we're told. It's where we all originally arrived from, and it's amazing that the sense of connection that people feel when they go to Africa. It's almost like once the dust of Africa has touched people's feet, they have the sense of connection too. So that was the genesis of the mindful safaris that I have been taking to Africa now every year, apart from this one for obvious reasons. But Shantum, tell me a bit about yourself too, and I'm fascinated to know what journeys you do and how they arose.
Now, I'd like to hear more, but okay, let me share a little bit about mine, and then we'll to play, because it's interesting how there's a little bit of a similarity in where we were brought up and how we discovered when we go to England, where I went to study too for university.
I recognize
I was brought up in Patna, which is in the state of Bihar. I went to the Buddhist sites as a young child, but it was only in 1988 when my own teacher, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen master, asked me to organize a journey for him to these sites, that I really made that into a practice. That is what he suggested to me. And that is what the Buddha had suggested 2,600 years ago in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, saying, those of you who are lay disciples or monastics, do go to these places and it will be of great benefit. So I started doing these journeys in the footsteps of the Buddha in 1988. And then slowly I started taking friends, and it became my own practice every winter. And then it also became my form of right livelihood, because I felt it allowed me to really combine my interest of my own spiritual practice with also making a livelihood. And then I got more and more interested in Buddhist culture. So then I started organizing journeys to places which had a Buddhist culture. For example, Ladakh, where we are now. I remember I've been doing a few journeys there. One special one was when the Dalai Lama, I think it was 2014, he was giving the Kala Chakra teachings there. So I'd taken a group there. And so just organizing journeys like that. And then, of course, to other countries like Burma or Thailand or Vietnam, where my own teacher's from, Sri Lanka, and also to different places in India, which have a Buddhist culture. Now, the Buddhist culture in India, a lot of it is sort of under the ground, as it were. India is like a big archaeological site, the Buddha land, but it's only in certain areas of the Himalayan belt, like in Ladakh, where you have the Vajrayana, type of Buddhism. So I feel it's a sort of interesting country, because we also have things like rock-cut caves in Maharashtra, where you can go and sit in the way that the monks and nuns sat there for 1,000 years. They're now archaeological sites, but you can study there, you can meditate there, and you can feel that very strong energy of an interiorness which you get in a cave when you meditate or when you are reading even the teachings. So that's, in short, what I've been doing. But I've also been interested in, David, in knowing who are the people who come on your journeys and how do they hear about it? And then.
Right. Well, typically what happens is people, because I write books about the Dharma, and possibly the better known books that I've written are a series called The Dalai Lama's Cat, in which I try to present the Dharma or key concepts of the Dharma in a kind of a fluffy coat, as it were. It's my wonderful teacher, Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodin, once said, even though you may love a baby, you can't feed a steak the finest meat. You have to start with baby food. And so I think my job really in the West is to try and present the Dharma to people in a digestible form, in a way that they can find accessible and entertaining. So entertain and educate. So I write books, and people who like the books will typically find out more about me by going onto my website, and that's where they can read about the Mindful Safari. So that's how I promote it. In terms of what sort of people are they are, in demographic terms, 40% American, 40% Australian, and the rest come from everywhere else, UK, Singapore, Middle East. And what we tend to do is they tend to be older, people who are slightly older, who have some disposable time and disposable income, because traveling to Africa is not cheap. We congregate for about a week in just outside Victoria Falls, and I take them on this marvelous journey to experience things both outer and inner. But listening to your own journeys, Shantum, I was really fascinated by a couple of things you said. One is that you said the Buddha himself said there's great benefit to going to these sites. And I'd love to ask you what those benefits are. And also, you mentioned the feeling the strong energy in the cave. And I was wondering, do you think that, this is a separate question, obviously, do you think that that energy has anything to do with resonating with people who have meditated there in the past? Or would you attribute it to other things?
Yeah, I think to go to a place which is in a way a place you're not habituated to is going to touch seeds in your consciousness or in your life which have been lying dormant. So it's a very good way of getting to know yourself, who you are. And it is not always the comfortable place you want to go to know that. So when you go traveling, you're sometimes going into the unknown. There's a lot of trust. And in that, fear may arise, humility may arise, of course, patience. So all these qualities that we develop as human beings, which are very necessary, are developed on travel. Travel as an education, as you were saying also. I think it's an education to get to know ourselves. Of course, the external is important, and that is what is interesting. That's why people get attracted to Victoria Falls, for example, or to the Bodhi tree. But for me, the journey, the inner journey, is, I would say, more important than the external journey. It's important to have the external sort of skeleton of where you're going, but it's how you go that is more important. And that inner journey of when you see a beggar, for example, in India, and India, is going to bombard your senses anyway, which way. And you see, and what are you going to do? What comes up for you? Is it fear? Is it guilt? Is it compassion? Is it, feeling generosity? What is it? Confusion? So I often tell people, don't give, because that will allow you to close that little chapter. Feel the discomfort and feel what is happening inside you. And if you want to give, put something in another pocket. And at the end of the journey, you might want to give it to some social organization or something like that. It's not that you don't give, but use that as an opportunity to know yourself. And this is a process every day. And I feel it's not just practice traveling alone. When you travel in a group, it is very key. Because, for example, I structure the day in such a way that we have a morning meditation, and then we have breakfast, and then we go to the site where I'll tell stories or teachings about the life of the Buddha, and then in the afternoon, we'll have a rest period, and then we'll go into something quite deeply into India. I feel India herself is a great teacher. But in the evening, we'll always have a discussion, a sharing of what struck us that day. And even if there are 15 of us traveling, we've all had the same experience, or we've seen the same things, but we've seen with different 15 pairs of eyes. So what you're doing in this journey is you're traveling more and more like an organism rather than just a collection of individuals. And that is a great, great teaching. And in fact, my role as a facilitator of these journeys is to build that group, that Sangha, as the Buddha called it. So I think the benefits are huge. Each one finds their own. I think the Buddha realized that just going into an area which is the unknown is important. And that's what we do in the interior too. And I think in terms of the power of places, it's difficult to say. I do feel that intentionality is very important. And when we go with a certain intention, and when many, many people go with the same intention, then there is an energy field that is created. And I feel also on this earth, there's certain types of spaces. You can feel ridges and mountains and confluence of rivers, which have a certain type of energy. And so, you have to be tuned in to feel it. But if you go with that openness, it touches you. And sometimes I go to the same place. I've been more than 150 times to some places on the Buddhist sites, whether it's Kushinagar, where the Buddha died, or Sarnath, where the Buddha gave his first teachings, or Bodh Gaya. And sometimes I don't feel it, and sometimes I feel it. So also depends on our own internal state at that time.
Yes.
And what do you feel? I mean,
I can relate so much to everything that you're saying, Shantam. It's so true. In our case, I have structured our days because we probably have far less externally in terms of cultural and spiritual significance, although we do have a plethora of amazing animals and other sensory experiences. But I structured the day in such a way that it's quite it's almost like a combination between a retreat and a safari. So the first thing we do every morning, we gather on the outstairs balcony and we meditate. I do a guided meditation for about 20 minutes, and that really sets the tone for the day. We then have a light breakfast, and then we get into our vehicles and go game viewing for a couple of hours, which may sound like a long time, but when you're on the back of a Land Rover, and for all you know, there could be a herd of elephants around the next corner, your eyes you're totally focused on what's going on out there. It's one of the most extraordinarily easy ways to be mindful. That's what I love about nature. Nature drags us out of our narrative chatter, drags us away from what normally occupies us, our thoughts. And so we're very focused on what's going on out there. And then we have a beautiful lunch, and then like you do, a bit of a siesta, and then regroup for another meditation and another game drive in the evening, and a comparing of notes, just like you guys at the end of the day. And as you say, intentionality is one key part. And because we have people from such disparate parts of the world, what draws them all together, all on the same page, is this intention. And it's really a beautiful feeling by day 1 or 2, because we're isolated from everyone else. We don't see other people at all, only the staff that are looking after us in the lodge. But that sense of together as a small group, the bonding that occurs can be very, very powerful, and the sharing that goes on. And I find a number of things really come into play, but one of them, without question, is that when we're out in nature, the animals there don't have the same operating systems that we have out in the normal world. We're not judged by our looks, our appearance, or how wealthy we are. People very rarely ask, what job do you do? It doesn't come up unless you mention it in conversation. There's a kind of openness and receptivity to nature. And nature teaches us so many things, but perhaps the most powerful thing that comes to us right away, and possibly the same thing that you feel in India when confronted with poverty, is that how fortunate am I to be able to say, oh, in 2 hours we're going to be having lunch, or in a few hours I'm going home to bed. We're looking at all these animals who every day for them is a struggle for daily survival. There's no assumptions about they're going to be there tomorrow. And when we're out in the wilds, we really do come face to face with the fact that as human beings, we live lives of such extraordinary privilege. And so there's a sense of gratitude really that arises from that. And another thing we do is we go to a local school and we help donate things. And once again, people from the Western world who haven't seen poverty are really touched and moved by the spontaneous gratitude of the kids. And it's like giving a kid a little frisbee in an African village. The delight in their faces is just extraordinary. You can't help contrasting that with giving a frisbee to a child in Perth, which you won't get many thanks at all. And so we come to realize it's not the frisbee that's doing it, it's the mind. And it's all about cultivating minds, and our minds are to be more open and more appreciative of what we have. And to me, gratitude is one of the most powerful qualities that arises quite spontaneously and naturally when we spend time in nature. But I've been rambling too much, Shannon. Tell me about the impact on your groups when you go on your travels.
Yeah, I think I think what you're saying about it being a retreat is important. I do think of it a bit like a retreat on wheels, and also that cultivation of non-reactivity, of letting go of our judgment, so that we can go beyond what we see as poverty, but touch the beauty and the wisdom of a culture and the countryside. In your case, the wisdom of the animals. In my case, it's really, I feel places, there's a deep wisdom culture, the very grounded people who we meet and where we travel. So we go to villages, we have discussions with villagers about maybe about farming, about parenting. But I think for the people coming from outside, which is for me too, a large majority of people who are from America. I've taken people from Vietnam and Japan and Korea and Sri Lanka, and of course Australia and South Africa and England. English-speaking people. But I think these are transformative journeys. And each time I feel something shifts. Now, for example, in Varanasi, I might take people to the ghats, which are where to the burning ghats, which are where people are cremated. Now, to see that nakedness of death is very powerful for people who are not used to it, especially from Western culture where it's all hidden away. But then I don't just do it as a sort of tourist thing. Then we read the sutras on death, and we also look at what the teachings on death are. And so, in fact, it's quite interesting. I start the journey with all this much greater razzmatazz of Bodh Gaya and Sarnath and places which are very heavy on sensory overload. And then later go to the calmer places like Kushinagar, where the Buddha died, or Lumbini, where he was born, for much deeper reflection of what is happening. And in fact, I find it's after sort of 7 day, 8, when the inner transformation starts taking place, when there's a little more discomfort in people. It's not a sun and sand holiday. It's really a journey of discovery. I remember once I was sitting in Sarnath, and there was a woman in our group who was obviously very well healed, and she was sitting there, and she was a bit overcome by what she saw as the poverty at that point. And she started crying, and a woman who had nothing, she was just like wearing a sari which was slightly torn, came zooming across, she was cutting grass, put her arm around and says, you have everything and you're crying, we have nothing and we are happy. And of course that made her fall even more. Yeah. And this woman, many years later, she wrote to me 6 years later and said, it was instances like that and a few more that made her come out of a very abusive marriage. And she was very happy. And in fact, I just talked to her a few days ago. We have been doing Zoom calls over the last, taking these journeys. People have been coming on journeys over the last 30 years. Every week I've been talking to one of the groups. And amazing stories. I mean, they go on and on. In fact, somebody just suggested writing a book about these journeys because these experiences. And I take students. There's a student who came from an Indian background, and he was rejecting Indian culture, and his mother was, and then he bought a sitar because he learned sitar while he was here. He suddenly got interested. And then it was his mother who started playing the sitar more than him because his father used to play the sitar. And so the whole family came together through this one trip. Somebody went off drugs. But on the other side, I would say that it takes a lot of guts to come on these journeys. It's much more comfortable to sit in your home and, be in the habituated place. You're adventuring out. So I feel great gratitude for the people who come. It's not just what I offer, but I think I have a lot of gratitude for these people who come and make these journeys. And I always say, they say, why do you do this? I say, well, I'm here because you're here, in a sort of way. And it's also, of course, what is my own practice. So there are lots of stories of transformation. I'd like to hear yours. One other thing which I think probably happens in your case too is lifelong friendships that develop. I remember there was a woman who came from California who was a sort of one of these women entrepreneurs of the year in America. And there was another woman in New York who was a photographer. And every time this woman came from California to New York, she would add an extra day to her trip just to be with Nancy, this is Caroline, and go through old photographs and talk about the trip. That was it. That was their whole agenda for the day. And so things like this with so many. But what about you, David? What is your experience of this?
Well, once again, everything you say really totally reflects and resonates with me, Shantum, because I think you're totally right. The kinds of people that come on the kind of trips that you and I arrange are self-selecting in the sense that they've reached a point where they're now ready to take that leap. And it is to some extent a leap of faith, a leap into the unknown, and they're trusting in you or in me to help guide them through a process. I often feel like my job is almost like that of a facilitator. I'm almost flying on the coattails of the wonderful wildlife and the scenery that we have, and I let it do its magic. I almost that's all I have to do, almost like help people get to know each other and expose them, because once they're there, that's when the magic actually happens. And you're quite right that the bonding that occurs as people go through that process together, the process of discovery, in my case, I think it's more a discovery of that I am actually nature. I'm not separate from nature. That kind of realization in the kind of Buddhist sense, that in the sense that it deepens your understanding, deepens the point that it changes your behavior. I think once that's shared, it really is very powerful at creating bonds between people. And just like you say, there's two people who met. One lives here in Australia, another lady lives in England. And when my Australian friend went to see her brother in London, she went up to the north of England, especially to see a woman that she had only met for 5 days a year before in Africa. And we still have, during the COVID period in particular, and when we had those bushfires in Australia, there were many emails flying to and fro around the world as everyone, terribly empathetic and concerned about each other. So, as you say, there is when friendships are formed during a time of emotional transformation, they are enduring friendships. They're very special friendships, and they go beyond the fact that they only actually spent very few days together, but it's the nature and the quality of those few days that were spent together that really endures. And to me, that's one of the most heartwarming things about the mindful safaris and my involvement in them, is knowing that I'm helping to facilitate it. It's all happening, but I'm a small part in being instrumental, and that gives me such joy, because I know that I'm helping people connect around the world, not only in terms of connecting them within themselves to nature, but to each other. And what a wonderful thing to be able to offer, I feel.
Yes, no, I think we're very fortunate to be able to do this, to do what we love and to share it with others. In fact, as you say, I feel I learn a lot each time from the people who come, from each journey. And I often tell my family I couldn't hope to meet a better set of people in the world than the people who come on these journeys. They sort of self-select. A lot of it is through word of mouth, people who've come on journeys before. We don't have a big advertising campaign or anything like that. So it's really a lot of trust, and it's a lot of, but I think my interest in this, my deeper interest, is the transformation that people go through. See, you can meet the Buddha externally. You can go to the sites where he was, you can sit in the cave where he sat, across the river where you can meet the people he met, the descendants of the people he met, children. You can hear the teachings, but it's only when you really practice that you can actually imbibe that reality and understanding of impermanence, of interconnectedness, and really touch the joy and happiness that we all have within us. So I'm interested in that to a large degree, this internal journey. But the external journey is so beautiful anyway. You see the mustard fields, and you see the farming practices. And in a way, India hasn't changed very much for 2,600 years in some ways. So you can really see the Buddha. And I remember one day when I was going, you could see, we saw a dead person, an old person, a sick person, and a monk. And the Buddha saw exactly those four sides.
Exactly.
So you can, and I think that interconnectedness with nature, with everything else, which is a key element of the Buddha's own teachings, is important to understand. And I think I would say that India as a teacher, we do it in the context of the Buddha's teaching. So I know you also lead meditations and offer these sort of practices along the journey. I think it'll be nice to share one of those as we close. But I'd also like to just touch on one other thing, which is really I've enjoyed doing a lot, is taking young people. A few years ago, I took some people from a college, and then now I take young people from schools. There's a school called Phillips Exeter Academy, or it's another one called Groton. And every year, and these children, I don't take them on a Buddhist journey. I take them on a sort of immersion journey, this outer inner, but it's, I might take them to a nature place, or we have a trust called Ahimsa, which works in villages. So we take them to the villages where there are people, Muslim communities, Hindu communities, tribal communities. So, but these young people, their age, they're at a very impressionable age, and really shift something. And now I've heard from some friends who 10 years after the journeys, how that one journey determined to a large degree the career they took, and things like this.
Yeah.
So, I think, David, it'll be wonderful to meet also, but whenever we can, off Zoom. But would you like to lead us a little bit in the meditation as we close? And just to see maybe the interconnectedness of nature with our, with us.
Thank you, Shantum. I'm delighted to do that. Yes, I see we've got a little golden hand, which is telling us that we need to wrap up. So without further ado, I will dive into a very brief analytical meditation on nature. And what I like about this one is many of us feel totally separate and disconnected from nature. If we live in a city in particular, this is emphasized. But in truth, that is an illusion. And so I'd like to just invite you, please, to assume a comfortable meditation posture, just like you described at the start. Nice upright posture, a straight back, hands resting like a pair of shells in your palm, in your lap. Comfortably roll back shoulders, close your eyes, sit like a mountain, unruffled, serene. Take a few nice deep breaths, really inflate your lungs, and just let go of everything. Let go of all thoughts of the past, physical sensations, any thoughts of the future. As much as possible, try to be pure consciousness in this moment, here and now. And I'd like you to please just focus on how, when we go out into nature, we tend to think of ourselves as being separate, distinct, visiting nature as outsiders. But consider how every breath that you take, you're breathing in oxygen, which you need to live. And every exhalation, you're exhaling carbon dioxide, which are needed by the trees and the plants around us. So in fact, every breath that we take is an exchange with the trees and the plants. Consider how 90% of our body is actually comprised of water. We're constantly consuming water, whether it's as pure water or in tea or coffee or whatever beverage. We're constantly passing water out. That 90% of our body mass, which is water, originates in the sky as rain. And so constantly we are in exchange with nature as we take in and pass out water, completely dependent on rain, on the oceans, on the sea, on rivers. Consider how every cell in my body comes from somewhere else, originally from the earth. Whatever my food source, originally all the elements in my body, every cell, every atom, is only there because it comes from the earth. And similarly, I'm constantly passing out part of what I'm eating, food waste, which returns to the cycle. I am soil, as well as water, as well as air. And none of this would be possible were it not for warmth and heat and light. Nothing could exist, even if there was plenty of water and air and soil, if the sun wasn't there. It's all completely dependent on the sun. I am dependent on the sun. I am a manifestation of the sun. And when we consider this in contemplation, how every breath that I take is an exchange with the plants and the trees, how most of what I am, physically speaking, comes from the skies as rain, how my body mass is the earth, and all of this is dependent on the sun. I recognize how, far from being a visitor to nature, a person who visits nature, I actually am a manifestation of nature, an embodiment of nature. Far from coming into nature, I am nature, and nature is me. And in your own time, open your eyes and come back to the room. Thank you, Shantum. Thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed our conversation so much.
No, thank you. And thank you, David, for leading us in this wonderful of interconnectedness, interdependence. And I feel that it's something which is very accessible to all of us all the time. My own teacher wrote a very nice book called The Sun, My Heart. Something like, well, we can't exist without a heart, we can't exist without the sun. And I think also Simple has been very kind to invite us. I feel that, I'd like to thank them again for this and really trying to share what is emanating out of a mountain culture, out of a Buddhist culture, and something that can be a benefit to the whole world, to children who want to embody mindfulness, all these things that are coming out of that sort of culture. So thank you again to the organizers. And I think as we close, if I could invite three sounds the bell again and then just bow out. Unless, David, you want to say something before we do that? Anything you want to add?
Just to add my thanks to yours, Shantum. I really do appreciate it. It's been a very special time, and I hope one day I'll be able to actually come to Ladakh in person.